Sales of alcoholic beverages grew by 20% in the first months of the pandemic. But now in 2022, some people are questioning the wisdom of all of that drinking. And some retailers are trying to profit on the non alcoholic drink trend. This week, we asked the question: are non alcoholic drinks a new retail tenant category? Plus, economist Ryan Severino is going to join us to talk about how inflation might affect consumers in 2022. All of that right now on Everything We Know About Retail. Hello, my name is James Cook. I'm coming to you live from Indiana. Today, I am celebrating dry January with this. Where's the label? Can't really see it. Does that show up? With a sparkling Welch's grape juice left over from a Christmas holiday party we had with the family that was still in the fridge. So I'll be cracking this open later. We'll see if there's any fizz still left in it. But Taylor Coyne is joining us from Los Angeles.
Well, I am also enjoying a non-alcoholic beverage. This is an IPA from Athletic Brewing Company. It's 9 a.m. here.
Hey, anytime is the right time for near beer. I mean, some people say anytime's the right time for any beer. I would say like 4 to 6 p.m. isn't the right time for any beer. Anyway, that's another situation. So, this is Everything We Know About Retail, the show where we tell all of you everything we know about retail. We do it 3 things at a time.
So, James, what do you know about retail this week?
Well, Taylor, here's the first thing I know about retail. Consumer prices grew 7% year over year in December. This is a multi-decade high. And the question is, how much are these increased prices going to affect shoppers? And how much are they going to affect retailers? So to find out, we are inviting JLL chief economist Ryan Severino. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, team. How are you doing?
We're doing great. Ryan, do you have a near beer or a boozeless liquor that you're enjoying this morning?
No, but I do have the world's largest mug of tea, so I feel like that must account for something.
Now, is that a perspective trick, or is that really larger than your head?
No, this is about, just to give you a sense, I mean, I don't have a small head to begin with, but it's pretty sizable. It was part of my quest to try to replicate that huge mug that Bill Lumbergh has in the movie Office Space. I couldn't quite find one that had World's Greatest Boss on it, but the size definitely was appropriate.
I love it. So, Ryan, we're hearing inflation everywhere in the news, but I want to start with the simplest question. What is causing prices to go up?
On a fundamental level, it's really economics 101. There's a demand side of the economy and there's a supply side of the economy. I think the supply side is the part that's really come in for a bit of a beating in the press lately. Clearly, there are supply chain disruptions. I don't want to discount that at all. But I think the part of the story that's probably more relevant right now, that's really getting short shrift, is the demand side of the economy. We as consumers continue to have a voracious appetite in a way that we haven't really seen in quite some time, especially as it pertains to goods. And as a consequence of that, demand is just growing faster than supply can keep pace. And when that happens, the prices for goods rise, and then the price level in the economy rises, and thus inflation.
All of that, and considering, like you said, demand is crazy. We want all of the things all of the time. But how do you think all of this, is going to affect consumer behavior?
I think in the short run, consumers are still pretty well placed to really countenance this. And I think it goes back to this demand side. If we did not have the ability to go out and buy these things, then you wouldn't be seeing inflation at the levels that we are seeing. And I think it's because we're pretty well positioned, because we still have some pent-up demand, proverbial dry powder, because 2020 was a weird year where we didn't go out and spend a lot of money. There's still some government stimulus that has been helping consumers, both on the fiscal side and on the monetary side. And then the wealth effect, the fact that asset values have gone up over the last 2 years, especially once we got through that immediate correction in the marketplace, those households are feeling pretty flush and able to go out and spend more on a discretionary manner. I think a lot of that sets up consumers as we head into this year. Now, I do think some of that starts to back off. Stimulus starts to fade, especially if the Fed starts to raise rates. Pent-up demand won't stay pent up forever, but the labor market is so tight right now. You are seeing strong year-over-year wage growth. I think even if we can't sustain this voracious appetite, I do think that there will still be some ammunition that we have to bring to consumption because the labor market will stay so strong this year. So probably not able to sustain the ridiculous pace of spending that we saw last year, but I don't think that we are headed off a cliff either.
You know, Ryan, whenever I think about inflation right now, I think about gas prices going up and I think about food prices. Like, just personally, meats seem a lot higher. And there's certain things like that. Is that a demand thing or is that a supply chain thing that causes those?
It's sort of both right now. There clearly is a lot of demand for food is a very non-discretionary thing, and so people will substitute away from certain expensive categories, but obviously it's impossible to completely substitute away from that. Energy is a little bit interesting because we're still very strong consumers of energy, but with not everyone going into an office and the pandemic still disrupting normal economic patterns, especially the consumption of services, we might not be driving as much as we once were, taking the kinds of vacations, but there is definitely a disruption on the supply side. And I think the pandemic continues to really mess around with that. I just said to my wife earlier, I was in the grocery store last night. There are definitely things that are missing from not, panic caliber the way that we saw in the initial stages of the downturn, but there are definitely categories that are missing. And some of that is because so many people are sick right now that it's a disruption to the supply side of the economy. So I think it's really a combination of both of those things. There clearly is a lot of demand for food and energy, but there clearly is a disruption, I think, especially on the food production side right now.
So, what's your advice to retailers? I mean, I feel like they're probably trying to stockpile goods, I would imagine, which is makes it worse, right?
I think what you saw was we went through a period where inventories really bled down because they were not restocking, and then they struggled to catch up because the consumer appetite just snapped back in such a dramatic fashion. My advice to retailers, insofar as I can really advocate any as an economist, is ride this wave while it lasts, because I don't think that it's going to completely last. And again, that's not to say that I think consumers are going to massively change their behavior, but at some point, fingers crossed on this, I'm not an epidemiologist and I don't play one on the internet, but we will go back to some semblance of our normal lives as consumers, which means we will consume services more readily than we are right now. That will ease off some of the pressure on goods consumption. So my thought is, while we can capitalize to an extent on consumers predominantly still being home until we get through, I guess, the next wave of this pandemic, warmer weather, things like that, I'd play it to the hilt, because I don't think it's going to last. Again, I'm not saying, consumers are headed to never spending money on goods, but I think at some point we almost have to go back to relying on consumers spending more on services than they have been for the last 18, 24 months.
I'm personally excited to stop spending so much money on home goods. Granted, I am going through a construction project, but my goodness, I am part of the problem. I've been waiting on a dishwasher for many months.
Yeah, you're not alone in that. I mean, that's what we did as consumers. While we're not going into offices and we're not taking vacations and we're not going on business trips and we're not going to bars and restaurants and nightclubs or whatever the cool kids are doing these days, instead of spending that money on those experiences, we're staying home and spending it on stuff. And that is just exacerbating inflation, and it's exacerbating the at least the perception of the shortage of things in the economy right now, if not the actual shortage of things in the economy.
All right. And considering, so much of this with our new wave and, people are kind of inside again for the most part, how long do you think this is going to last? How long will inflation last for?
I think the first quarter, don't be surprised if inflation still looks ugly. I'm not trying to scaremonger, but I think second quarter is really when I expect there to be a bit of a reset on this, if you will. And I say that because inflation didn't really start to run up until around March, April last year. The combination of vaccination plus that latest round of additional fiscal stimulus really provided fuel to the fire to inflation. If you look at the month-to-month changes, you really see it accelerate March, April, and then we're off to the races after that. I think once we get to the second quarter and we're calculating the year-over-year changes relative to last year, as opposed to last year when we were calculating them relative to pretty tepid price changes in 20, I think that's when you will start to see that number back off. And I think as we go forward from there, I think the demand side starts to moderate. I think the supply side continues to figure things out. I think you'll start to see inflation not immediately take a massive down leg, but start to back off second quarter, third quarter into fourth quarter this year. But first quarter could still look a little ugly.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I'm crossing my fingers that Omicron burns itself out in like the next month or so. We just have a lousy first quarter, and then things get back to normal. So, Ryan, it sounds like I think cautiously optimistic would be the point of view I'd take in the long-term message around inflation.
I agree. I still feel cautiously optimistic about the outlook for the economy and the outlook for inflation. And if you're looking for sort of the kind of good news, bad news, silver lining, if you will, I do expect the economy to slow down relative to last year because we just, again, can't sustain that torrid pace. But as a consequence of that, I also expect inflation to back off because I just don't see the economy growing as quickly as it did last year. So even if people might hear some potentially negative things about the economy, I would say keep that in perspective. The economy is still performing incredibly well. But I think as it starts to decelerate a bit from last year's incredible pace, I think you will also see inflation start to back off. The one caveat to that is, this pandemic is going to do whatever it's going to do. And if we find ourselves in, some kind of unexpected pandemic disruption later in the year, I think all bets are off on that. But I think excluding that idiosyncratic phenomenon, I think both growth and inflation should decelerate, but still be in a relatively healthy place throughout the balance of this year.
All right, sounds good. Well, when things do change, and they always do, we'll bring you back to tell us more about it, Ryan. Ryan, are you up for sticking around for the rest of the show and possibly throwing in your 2 cents on some of our other topics for discussion?
Absolutely. This is a conversation topic I am genuinely interested in, so I will gladly stick around. Thanks.
Awesome. So, James, what else do you know about retail?
All right. Well, Taylor and Ryan, here's the second thing that we know about retail. Before we get into the non-booze booze discussion, I want to talk a little bit about some openings and closing announcements that we've had recently. And one of the things that I like to do on this show is we don't talk about metrics like they're just these things that happen. They're always like a part of a bigger trend. Like there's always something going on that causes these opening announcements or closing announcements. So I pulled out 3 recent announcements, and I want to talk about 3 quick trends that they illustrate. So the first one is about drugstores. And, historically, and we've got like tens of thousands of drugstores across the US, and they've historically been about fulfilling prescriptions. But now you go to Walmart, you go to Target, you go to the grocery store, all of those places also fulfill prescriptions. So why would you make a separate trip to Walgreens or CVS? So that is the kind of existential question right now for drugstores is how do they differentiate themselves in order to survive? How do they make themselves something more than just a place where you get your prescription filled? So they want to become healthcare destinations. And that's what all of the major chains are saying that they want to do right now. So CVS just announced that as a part of that strategy, they're going to close 900 stores, which sounds like a lot, but it's only about 10% of their portfolio. And with those remaining stores, they're going to double down on healthcare. They've got a new format, a new concept called Health Hub that offers a lot of different health services. And the idea is you've got fewer locations, but people come to those locations because they're getting more than just getting their prescriptions filled. Walgreens wants to compete in the same way. So they've been investing in a bunch of different healthcare companies. I think, Taylor, didn't we talk about Village MD, a couple of months ago, Walgreens bought controlling interest in that, which is like a chain of primary care physicians. Obviously, the end game here is they'll start having doctors. Maybe if they're not in Walgreens, maybe they're co-located next to a Walgreens in the same shopping center. So the idea here is, again, healthcare destinations. And Rite Aid also just announced they're going to be closing 63 locations as a part of a larger portfolio review. It sounds like negative news when you hear about all these closing announcements, but honestly, we are over drugstored in the US. I don't know if we've talked about that before, but any person who, there are intersections that I can think of in my little area of Indiana where there's a drugstore on 3 of 4 corners. That's unnecessary. Let me ask you guys real quick. Do you think that the traditional drugstore needs to change in order to survive? Or are you guys okay with just going to, you got your drugstore that you go to, or are you getting your prescriptions filled at the grocery store?
I'm a drugstore person. I
Mhm.
like going. However, I do think it needs to evolve. You can tell the drugstores that have done a really nice renovation, perhaps in the past couple of years, to expand a lot of the beauty offerings. You've seen, again, not a drugstore, but Target, how they've really amped up their beauty section. You will get people going to the drugstore if you can compete on that kind of offerings. Like, I love going to the grocery store because I will always pick up a new color of nail polish. That's my thing. That's my guilty pleasure. I really like doing that. But I will also say there is something about going to a drugstore. That's where I get my flu shots. I know I can get them at the grocery store, but I don't. I go to the drugstore. I just got my booster at a drugstore. I think being more of a destination of like a trustworthy destination for healthcare, like I think people already trust their pharmacy. So if you just
Yes.
expand on that, I think more people will go. So yes, I don't think it should stay the same. I think it should just build on the existing power it also already has. Draw
Yeah.
me in for the nail polish and the flu shots. And add on urgent care and I'm there.
Yeah, and some of the Walgreens I've been to have a pretty substantial liquor selection too. Speaking of.
They like not bad. I don't know if you guys also are familiar with Yasso bars. Oh, they're
What's that?
very good. It sounds bad when I'm going to describe it. It's a Greek yogurt like frozen treat. It's like a popsicle.
Oh,
Some drugstores also have very good selection of flavors. So just going to put that out there too of another pharmacy guilty pleasure purchase of mine.
It's funny.
all right. So that's trend 1: drugstores, existential crisis, figuring out what they're going to be. They're going to be healthcare destinations. Trend 2, Ryan, we brought you on to talk about inflation, and we talked about this idea that the cost of food is higher, the cost of gases are higher. For some of us, we eat that cost. For others, family on budgets, lower income families, it just makes the money they have left over to spend every week a little bit less. So families on budgets are looking to save money any way they can. And there's a whole slate of discount retailers. We talk about them all the time. Dollar General, Aldi, even like Ross Dress for Less, that are all expanding because they know that there's this whole group of consumers that mostly they care most. They like value, but they care most about cost. So we have a new big announcement from Big Lots. They're going to open 500 stores over the next 5 years. If you're not familiar with Big Lots, it's a lot bigger than a Dollar General. So like say a Dollar General is what, like 10,000 square feet? Maybe a Big Lots is like 25,000 square feet. They're pretty big. I would call them like a junior anchor. They've got more than Dollar General has. Like they have mattresses and appliances and furniture. So the idea here is this trend of this value, this group of consumers that really is shopping on price. It's not going anywhere. Big Lots doesn't need to have a great fancy website. They just need to offer the lowest prices and people come buy them in person. I think there's just always a demand for low prices. Ryan, ever been into a Big Lots?
I have actually.
Yeah.
And you're right. It's definitely different than I think what most people think of as the traditional dollar stores. My maternal grandfather is originally from pretty rural Western Pennsylvania, and I don't always go to our annual family reunion, but as a researcher at heart, I love going into the retail out there because it's definitely different from the retail where I live closer to New York City, and so I always learn something interesting when I'm out. So that out that way is where I've been to multiple of their stores. And you're right, it's different from I think what I was certainly expecting when I first went into one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, last trend. I don't know if this is a trend or not, but it's something we're hoping for. It's the return to office. We know, at least we think we know, that eventually people are going to get back to the office in mass. When they do, and I've already run into this, they're going to find if you're a suit wearer, be you a gentleman or a lady, you're going to find that maybe your suit doesn't fit quite the way it used to. I had to go to a wedding a couple of months ago, and I was like, I don't know if I can get this thing back on. So we're gonna have a group of people going back to the office who need a new suit. Indochino wants to be there to be ready for them. They make custom suits. They're like Suit Supply. There's a couple of other chains like that where you go in, they measure you out, and then you get usually you get a custom suit in the mail, but you can also go in and try it on. They're going to open 21 new locations. They're expanding in California, they're expanding in New York, then which is where they've already got stores, and then they're adding in a bunch of new markets like New Mexico and Kentucky and Alabama. So obviously there's this sense that we've got this return to office. It's got to happen at some point, and we got to be ready for it. So Ryan, I know you're a suit wearing man. Are you going to get yourself a new one when you get back to the New York office in some sort of regularity?
So it's interesting that you mentioned them, because at the recommendation of a friend of mine, I actually did get an Indochino suit made, and so I went in, I had it measured, I went to pick it up. There were a couple alterations that needed to be made. Of course, I obtained the finalized suit in January of 2020. So I've only really had the opportunity to wear it once since then. So I feel like the suits that I should have been wearing throughout a lot of the last 2 years are now sitting there waiting for me. But I embrace the suit. Even if the rest of the world is going to stay in athleisure from here on out, I have been back in my suit a lot last fall when I was traveling. And I'll be honest with you, it felt good to put on a suit again after not really wearing one for so long. So I am fully embracing suits again, even if the rest of the world decides they are discarding them.
Interesting. Something I didn't mention, Indochino, they have both standalone locations, and then they also do shop in shops within Nordstrom. Was yours a standalone location that you went to?
Yeah, I went to the one at the Mall of Short Hills here in New Jersey, and it was great. Because I get my suits made traditionally from someone I know. I just wanted to try this out because my friend recommended it so highly, and I can say, at least to the limited exposure that I've had to actually wearing it, the quality seems great relative to the cost. And I'm not explicitly advocating for any retailers on the show, but it was incredibly efficient and pleasant experience. So for whatever it's worth, I think their business model is probably a pretty good one, given the benefit relative to the cost associated with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, Taylor, what else do you know about retail?
Oh, all right. Here's the third thing that we know about retail, is that there's going to be a non-alcoholic spirit store coming to a location near you, likely if you live in an urban market. So James, not sure if you'll get one tomorrow or the next month, but for now you can have some of your sparkling
I got my Welch's right here. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh boy. It's so dark red.
Like, that is very dark.
I know. So Taylor, what non-alcoholic beverages do you enjoy?
Oh, which ones? So as I mentioned at the start of the call, here is Athletic Brewing Company. We also have Two Roots IPA. And again, I say all of these things, they're just IPA style beers. I will say, remarkably like a true IPA. And last but not least, this is a Curious Elixir. Their tagline is what's their tagline? It's a booze-free craft. Oh, that's it. Shaken, not slurred. You see what they did there?
Clever. What does that taste like then? I know, because it doesn't have the alcohol flavor.
It does not. So well, that's the thing, though. So many of these are meant to taste like the real thing. So this in particular is a spicy pineapple ginger and lime. So basically like your margarita. When I was drinking these, I would pour it on ice, get a salty rim, and throw like an orange peel in there. And it was very good. And I've got to say, Ryan, I can see your face. When I first started drinking these, I had to check to confirm that there was indeed no alcohol in it, because it tastes remarkably like an IPA. I will say it's not like, it's like a daytime IPA. So not like your super heavy, super, hoppy.
Real hoppy.
But it is like a real, like, I think, what is it? Like the Lagunitas daytime IPA.
The little something.
Those, I feel like they are like almost identical to those, which I will say after drinking these, I really now prefer a lot of the daytime IPAs.
Well, I was going to make a joke and ask you who said shaken, not slurred. Was that James Bland? But maybe it tastes better than I'm perceiving it to be. So I will keep an open mind about this.
So I think that's the thing. We've come a long way. So James, as you mentioned at the start of the show, some shocking number. What did you say? Drinking went up 20%?
At-home drinking alcoholic beverage sales went up by 20% in the first 7 months of the pandemic.
Right. So fear, anxiety, name all of those things that would make us turn to alcohol. Yeah. Not only that, for a lot of people, the signal of the end of the day was your commute home. There was none. So you started making a cocktail, pouring a glass of wine, drinking a beer, and that signaled the end of your day. So a lot of, self-reflection later, some thoughts on self-care, mental health, all of that. Consumers are becoming sober curious. So this isn't about giving up alcohol entirely, even though, of course, many people I'm sure have. This is about cutting back your consumption. And it's my favorite word in retail. It's all about options. You just want options. So you want good quality, non-alcoholic options, as we're learning about kind of all of these negative impacts when we overconsume. And then, someone from Nielsen, an executive on a panel, had said last year that 78% of people buying these non-alcoholic products are also buying alcoholic beer, wine, and spirits. So again, it's just the options. It's the, when I realize I'm drinking every single night of the week, let me substitute something so I'm still having that ritual during the work day or the work week, but I'm subbing it for something else. So I think arguably this trend has been taking off for the last couple of years, but I think this really took off as, again, a lot of this self-reflection. So people were buying a lot of these online. Cue me buying this because I was targeted on Instagram. And so you get all of these online platforms delivering these, but it wasn't easy to access them in store, some grocery stores. So when I was pregnant last year, this was my memory of non-alcoholic beers. This is your only option.
That is when I was in college, if you said near beer, that's it. That's the only one.
Exactly. Like I remember years ago, taking a vacation with my sister-in-law when she was pregnant with her first child. And his birthday was yesterday. He's 7 years old. And this is what we had in the refrigerator. No one would accidentally drink it. You knew what that was and you'd kind of stay away from it. No offense to anyone who likes O'Doul's. But again, this kind of idea of this was advertised to me on Instagram. Would have loved to have been able to go and talk to someone about it. I ordered it. This ended up being great. Loved it.
That looks like a fancy bottle. Are you willing to tell us how much that cost?
I would have to go and look at my receipts. This is not cheap. That's the other thing too. The market for like quality NA products is a lot. For some of those like liquor bottles. I don't know if either of you have heard of Seedlip.
Yeah, maybe. What is that?
They're supposed to be, again, so I think we all think of, when you think of NA things, you think of beer, but they've gone into this kind of liquor world as well. So Seedlip has these beautiful bottles, and like when I had one, I basically had a fake gin and tonic using Seedlip. Like that was kind of, you can get like a really herbaceous-y, that was really kind of mirrored gin, which again is why a lot of people who are gravitating to this also are still drinking alcohol, right? Because it's not supposed to, it's really mimicking alcohol with not being alcohol. So again, for me personally, it was a great time to be pregnant or sober curious just because of all of these options. So according to a Forbes report, the demand for non-alcoholic and low alcoholic alternatives across the US has been exploding for years. Someone estimated as much as 506% since 2015, which sounds gigantic, but also let's like keep in mind of how small that was to begin with. But still, it's impressive. According to Grandview Research, there's a potential for global non-alcoholic drink market to reach 1.6 trillion by 2025. So again, clearly this is a thing. Again, I know so much about this because it was pregnant, so I was obviously looking for all of these things. This Athletic Brewing Co., you can get a lot of different places, but Whole Foods has it. Whole Foods has some great options. But that was kind of where I felt like I was limited to, is maybe like a fancy restaurant or Whole Foods. Not anymore. It's being helped by physical retail, all of us sober curious and pregnant people. So Spirited Away was one of New York's first booze-free bottle shop dedicated to zero-proof spirits, bitters, wines, and beers. They're in Soho now. They had opened up someplace else. I think they had took 300 square feet in the beginning, and they outgrew it. Needed a bigger space. Apologies for potentially mispronouncing this, but Boisson, they have 5 locations across New York, a couple in Brooklyn, the West Village, Upper East Side, Upper West Side. They sell 125 brands, and they're going to add more in the coming year. They have growth plans to expand across the New York metro area in order to deliver within hours. And they have a national growth plan, 7 to 10 markets by the end of 2022. I personally hope one of those is LA. That would seem logical. And an interesting tidbit, they're not beholden to state liquor laws because they're not selling any alcohol, which makes it easier to be omni-channel, which I thought was really interesting. There's another one that opened in Brooklyn. This is Minus Moonshine. I just kind of wanted to go through some pictures. Again, it's all about this experience. Like a craft beer store is a blast. So this is really just trying to recreate that experience, also with an emphasis on this cute dog in the corner. But you would pass by if you didn't necessarily know, if you didn't know better, you would absolutely think this is a nice liquor store.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't. Yeah, it just looks like a regular store with mixers and
Yep.
craft stuff that you would find. Yeah, I would say, oh yeah, it's a Brooklyn liquor place. So
yeah,
Taylor, it sounds like the you've got like the consumer, you've got like this expanding category in say like the supermarket, and then the separate trend of the standalone store, which sounds like it's all over New York. No surprise.
Yep.
LA probably next, San Francisco. Yep. Do we think there's a market for one of these? Maybe not in suburban Illinois, but maybe in Chicago, for example.
100%. I think any major market, I think there's a real growing trend for this. I've got friends too who want, again, it's about this ritual, it's about a signal of the end of the day, but they're really not trying to have a heavy cocktail at 5 p.m. on a Tuesday. So they'll go to one of these options. And I paused on this picture really quickly. So this is the Seedlip that I was talking to you on the right. They're really beautiful bottles. I know I'm even a sucker when I buy wine. I look at the label and I'm very attracted to the labels. Again, I'm okay. I know who I am. I'll admit that. So I just think that there's a ton of options, and so much of this is about knowledge. You can go into a wine store and not know anything, and it's nice to talk to an expert about it. I think that this is also an option. And especially, James, I don't know, you had sparkling Welch grape juice for someone in your household. I think this is also a nice way to be like, this is a great tasty option for maybe someone who does not want to participate in drinking, but also doesn't want to feel, left out, basically. And these stores
Yeah.
too are also great for all these new brands, because they can sell a whole line versus at the grocery store. I'm sure Athletic Brewing, I've seen 2 of them. Maybe they have more, but can only sell 1 or 2 to the grocery store, versus one of these shops will take, whatever they have will take. So it's really good for the brand. And obviously in a time of, especially New York, rising, vacancy on some of our corridors, this is great use. Great use. I'm thrilled about this.
I think it's great. I think that it's in the earliest stages, but it seems like it's right on the precipice, because there's that overlap with, I mean, as you mentioned, both sober curiosity and, pregnant women not wanting to drink, but then also like there's the health element of it, like not drinking alcohol too much is also great for your health. And I have to say, like, I'm sitting here sipping on this sparkling red grape juice. If you grew up going to Protestant church, this just smells like communion. Okay, that's all this smells like right now. That's like I'm drinking Sunday morning communion.
Well, I was going to ask James, did that ferment on you from December until
No, it just lost its fizz.
It
just lost its fizz. It's just like regular grape juice. Ryan, are you drinking any non-alcoholic drinks? Or for you, for me, it's usually just soda if I'm not going to have a beer.
Well, you know what I find interesting about this is that I always think as an economist, it's so almost impossible at this point, but I almost see them as kind of complements as opposed to substitutes for alcoholic beverages.
Yes.
because you will have different categories of people who will want to drink alcohol versus not. And then there will some people who maybe sometimes want the flavor of something, but without the alcohol associated with it. And I will tell you, I've seen Athletic in local liquor stores where I go to get beer. And I'll tell you, I don't mean this as a pejorative, but once I picked it up and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And then I read it wasn't alcoholic and I thought, oh, I don't really want it. But it's not so much because I'm drinking because I want the alcohol. I think it's just, I didn't expect it to have the flavor that I would get from a traditional beer.
Right.
After this conversation, I might honestly go try it and let you know what I think about it. But I have certainly seen it in the exact same place that the alcoholic beers are. And that's why I think, in addition to these distinct spaces, there's probably a play for them as a complement in traditional liquor stores in some markets.
Yeah. So this is something we're going to be keeping our eye on. I think that we come back to this in a year or two and find out. The real test will be if there's a liquorless liquor store in Kansas City, or Oklahoma City. Yeah.
I didn't mention one of the other ones that opened was in Charleston.
Oh, well, there you go. All right. Well, it's a thing now.
Yes. And they're carrying very similar brands to the rest of the, one like Spirited Away in New York. And they also have an online platform. I think they're moving right now. I think they had opened and are relocating. But again, so clearly there's some kind of market in Charleston. So again, I think it's applicable to a lot of places.
Awesome. All right. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have you back in, let's give it a month or two, see if this inflation cools down a little bit, and we'll check back in
a little bit.
Yeah. But it was great, as always, to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
No, thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. I always enjoy it. Thanks again.
Awesome. And Taylor, I want to remind you to listen to the Where We Buy podcast. If you like this show right now, you will love Where We Buy, where we go way in depth on all kinds of different retail trends. It's on any podcast app. Just search for Where We Buy, or you can find us at wherewebuy.show.
And if you like this show, hit the subscribe button in YouTube and click on the bell icon so that you're notified when a new show comes out. You can also follow the JLL retail page on LinkedIn. We will be back next week, thank goodness. New episode next Thursday, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. You can find that on everythingweknow.show or on the JLL Retail LinkedIn page.
So Taylor, since we've got all this extra time, what else do you know about retail?
James, I'll tell you all of it next week.